There you all are. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, new subscribers. Or should I say, welcome, new subscribers. Particularly Jasper, you know who you are. This week we've got an interesting one. It's two very interesting times of year. One, we're coming up to the fall or the autumn of the year in the United States. And in South Africa, they're already just past the spring. So I thought I would do a bait that can be used at both of those times of year. So we're going to do topwater walking baits today. Very interesting bait. I think the original guy was probably something like the Zara Spook. I don't know if it was the Zara Spook, but it was probably something like the Zara Spook. And essentially all it is a cigar-shaped bait that when you move your rod in a certain way, it has a glide from left to right or right to left, whichever way you want to talk about it, and it stays on the surface. Some of them spit. They spit water as they're moving. Some of them make a lot of noise. Some of them don't make any noise. It's a pretty cool bait. This is one of those baits, though, unfortunately, where our 7-foot medium heavy rod is not going to get it done. One of the very few baits. You could probably use it with the bigger versions of these baits, say like a Super Spook or a Shower Blows or something like that. But for the average size topwater walking baits, it's probably not going to do it. So what I recommend is a between 6'9" and say 7'2" medium to medium heavy moderate, so it's got the give in the top third of the rod. And line wise, this is another one of those baits which you can't use fluorocarbon. So we're looking at either monofilament, depending on the size of the walking bait you're using, so let's say between 12 and 17 pound. And if you want to go with the braid, that's fine. But remember, guys, you need a mono leader, kind of 12 to 18 inch mono leader. And I would recommend probably 15 to 17 pound mono is going to be great. And the reason for that is if they get any kind of disturbance in the air when you're casting, they may tumble and the hooks will get stuck on the braid, and that'll be the end of that cast. With the mono, they, for whatever reason, I think it's because maybe the mono is slightly stiffer, it tends to stay straighter, and you can fire it out. The other thing is, particularly in lakes which are slightly clearer, you don't want to have that straight braid to lure connection. I know it sounds weird, but when fish are coming up to look at something, or they're looking at something from below, they can actually see the braid, and it'll put them off. I've actually watched it happen in front of me when I was doing my own testing. Cool. Reel, not important. Spinning reel, people, your normal 5.5 to 1 spinning reel is going to get it done. Bait casting, guys, whatever you want. This is not a technique where you're using the reel to work the bait. This is more of a technique where the reel is a storage for the line. And we'll talk about retrieves and whatnot a little bit later on. So not a tremendously complicated bait. It is a bait that requires a little bit more effort to make it work properly. There are certain of the baits that work easier, and I'll explain to you why a little bit later. But it can be a lethal bait, particularly in situations where the bass are feeding heavily on bait fish. And you'll see in the close-ups, we'll talk about colors and things like that. Don't worry about that just yet. So that kind of, as far as tackle goes, that's about it. That's about it. It's pretty easy on the tackle side of things. The more important thing is the retrieve. Right. Okay, let's get into this a little bit. You know, walking baits, we've spoken about poppers or topwater poppers. We've spoken about frogs. We've spoken about floating frogs. Walking baits are a whole different category of baits. It requires a little bit more effort to make them do their job. The side-to-side action of the walking bait is what made them so popular, because it is a very, very erratic action. And we'll talk a little bit later about how varying your retrieve makes the bait do different things. The OG walking bait was the Zara Spook, or this some or other version of the Zara Spook, which looked a lot like that. Okay. But it's developed into a whole genre of baits. There are so many different types of walking baits. If we had to start talking about from beginning to end now, we'd be here for hours. So I'm going to cover a few basic categories, and that will help you determine which one best suits your particular body of water that you're going to fish. So we'll start off with the construction of the walking baits. They're all the same, or some variation on a theme. So here is an unpainted one just to look at. This is a Zara Spook Junior clone copy. Okay, so it's ABS plastic, hard plastic. It's a cigar-shaped lure, for want of a better description. It has no diving lip. I'm going to show you one just now that's a variation on that, and it's either got 2 or 3 connection points for the hooks and 1 for the line. So not a complicated bait. This one is backward weighted so that it sits slightly nose up. That helps when you start to walk it. We'll explain later how that works. Some of them have got rattles. This one here is a Lucky Craft Sammy clone. This one is the same. It's more of a banana shaped bait. It still does the same thing. They do walk a little bit easier. You can see this one here. Let's see if we can get that to focus nicely. Has got a slightly cupped mouth, as opposed to just a normal spook type bait. And what that does is it throws water when you are walking the bait. It just spits. We call it spitting. So it spits water, makes a little bit more commotion. That one's got slightly duller rattle in it, weighted back again so that it sits in a back down, head up thing. That also helps when you're walking the bait. There's a little teeny tiny one. And then a third genre of walking baits, and this one seems to have become a lot more popular over the last few years. It's actually a spitting bait. So I don't have any of the really big ones, like the shower blows and those type of baits. So it's got a much more cupped mouth. It does look a lot like a popper, but it's not cupped like a popper. It's more cut like that. And then this particular one has got a channel where the water goes in there and it comes out the gills. I don't know if it really works. I haven't had them work that great for me, but it does spit the water. But again, you can see cigar-shaped bait. Okay, so that's what they look like unpainted. What about painted? There's millions of variations. I'm a huge fan of the Sammy style walking baits, the Lucky Craft baits. So these are mine that I've painted. Just a couple of different paint schemes. There is a Super Spook, really big one, or a Super Spook clone. It's essentially the same bait as this guy, just way bigger, like way, way bigger. And that's a situational thing. And then finally, this little guy here, which doesn't get much play anymore. This is a really old one. I believe there's a new version of this. This is called a front runner, and it was first made by Norman. And what you would do with this guy would be your line would get tied onto that part there. Then there would be a line going from there to your walking bait, and then a treble hook over here. So you would have the two in tandem like that. Maybe with 12 inches, 10 to 12 inches of line between them, mono between them. And what that did, it looked like this bait was chasing this bait, whatever that may be. But let's talk about colors. And this is a really subjective part of walking baits, because in reality, all the fish is going to see is that, the belly of the bait. So why have different colored walking baits? And guys, I can't really explain that to you. A lot of lures are painted to catch fishermen, not fish, but it definitely does somehow make a difference. With my walking baits, these two here I painted for a project, so it's a slightly different thing. I was asked to do it and I did it. But with my walking baits, I like to keep it fairly simple. You all know I favor the bone color, that off-white or creamy color, and black mostly. That's my two go-tos. I do have quite a few baits that have some or other kind of reflective tape or holographic tape on them. And you can see on this one, that tape goes all the way around to the bottom, to the belly of the bait. And I think when you've got high, bright sky, any kind of light really, it doesn't really matter, as long as the light is directly shining onto this holographic tape or flash tape or whatever tape that is on the lure, it will give off some kind of flash. And you can think in your own mind, if a bait fish is being chased on the surface, that as it darts from side to side or it's trying to get away from a predator, the scales on the bait fish, if you think that this here represents a bait fish, the scales on the bait fish will flash. So that's not a walking bait, that's a swim bait. I'm just using that to illustrate my point. So I do believe that there is a place for flashing walking baits, absolutely. But if you're starting out and you do not know what colors to buy, I would get a black one, a bone one, and some kind of a reflective one to start with until you find what you favor most or what works best for you. And then if you feel that you would benefit from having some different color ones, that say a clear one for argument's sake, if you live in a lake where there's very clear water, you could use a clear walking bait, and the fish would key in on the commotion rather than the color of the bait. So like I said, the color selection side of it is very subjective. And it's like everything else that we do and we speak about when it comes to tackle and techniques for bass fishing. A lot of it is personal choice. And although you guys are probably sick and tired of hearing that, that is just a fact. One lake is not the same as the next lake. The water clarity, the structure that's in the water, the cover that's in the water, all those kind of things. Every lake is different. So that is the simple breakdown of a walking bait. The way that this bait is designed, and like I said, we'll speak about the retrieves. When you move your rod tip, it makes the bait glide from side to side. That's all that it does. And there's different ways to achieve different glides, which we'll speak about. But you can see the majority of walking baits on the bottom of them are flat or flat-ish. Even on this big spook, the bottom is flattened. And that's to allow it to lie and weighted, as we showed you with the unpainted ones, with a slightly nose-up profile like that. And when you move your rod tip, it causes the bait to move from side to side. And like this one would be considered a one knocker, which means it only has one bearing in it that makes noise. So it would clock, 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 clock as you were walking it back to the boat. So although the bait is very simple, the way that you fish it requires some thought and effort. Okay, that's the bait. So let's get into where we would fish these things. And this is going to be another one of those things which may seem a little bit vague. So we go back to our handy dandy map, which we've used since the beginning of this series. And primarily, let me just have a quick sip of my coffee here, guys. primarily like the bulk of our topwater baits which we use. Walking baits are also shallow water baits. However, we can make a case for lakes where there are pelagic baitfish species. And what do we mean by that? We mean shoaling baitfish species that only come shallow to spawn. So we're talking about blueback herring, we're talking about shad, we're talking about shiners. When those fish are being driven to the surface offshore, maybe on a shallow-ish point or something similar, and the bass come up and bust them from below, there is absolutely a case for throwing a walking bait, even if you're in 20 feet of water. It does not matter. If you have a bait that you can make those bass believe in, and you are fishing over busting fish in 20 feet of water, and you throw a walking bait out there and you walk it, and if you do watch any tournament fishing, you will know that that is, particularly in blueback herring lakes, is a prevalent technique that is used in tournaments, particularly during the blueback herring spawn. Okay, so that being said, let us look at our map. As per usual, these green areas here indicate our areas of shallow water in this lake. We'll get into that in a moment. Where might you find fish, pelagic baitfish species spawning? The best places to look for that type of activity are around points and secondary points on a lake. So, if you look at this lake here with me, this is a point coming out here on the land. There's some shallow water here, and then very quickly it becomes deep. It's the same with this area here. This would be considered a main lake point. There's the point. Shallow water, and very quickly it becomes deep. And then these little points here that you can see here would be considered secondary points. That does not mean that they will not hold fish. They will absolutely hold fish. What I'm trying to explain to you is, if you are trying to understand things like the herring spawn or shad spawn or things like that, with the herring spawn particularly, main lake points would be good areas to start. Shad spawn is slightly different. Shad require cover to spawn on, so anywhere in the lake where there's bushes in shallow water, anything that they can spawn on that's in shallow water, grass, bushes, makes no difference. They will spawn around those type of things. Okay, moving back to the shallow water. All the usual culprits apply here. Docks, areas of shallow water that have boulders or stumps in them where you can fish a bait over the top of it or next to the cover and structure. First prize. If you have emergent vegetation, which hasn't reached the surface yet, and you can fish that walking bait over the top of that emergent vegetation, absolutely fantastic area to try a walking bait, particularly something that's noisy, that can draw fish up out of the vegetation. Fantastic. And in areas of very shallow water where you are dealing with crystal clear water, you may want to start with something that is not quite as noisy. Say, we discussed a one knocker just now, that's just a knock, 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 or even something that's completely silent, like that just spits. There's no knock, there's no bearings inside it, there's no BBs inside it. It just walks and spits a little bit of water at the front of the bait. That would be for lakes that were super, super clear, where fish may be a little bit more wary than they would be in lakes that have more stained water. Down the sides of the docks, across the fronts of the docks. Fantastic. Your casting needs to be good, and you need to get it as close parallel to the side of the dock as you possibly can, because you want that bait to walk as close to the dock as possible to draw fish out from underneath the dock. I think that's going to do it for the close-ups. I don't think we've missed anything. So let's go back to the main camera. Let's talk about what time of year and weather and conditions and that type of thing that you would need to fish this bait effectively. I don't think that this is a very good cold water bait. I have caught fish in cold water on it, but I don't think it's the best bait for fishing when the water's super cold. I like to start fishing walking baits pre-spawn. And I'll tell you why, guys. The reason that I like to do that is I use it as a search bait. You may not necessarily, I'm not saying you won't, but you may not necessarily catch a lot of fish on it pre-spawn when the water's still cool, but it will give you an indication as to where the fish are in the water column. You will definitely catch fish on it at that time of year. And as you move into the spawn, when particularly the male bass or the buck bass become more aggressive, you'll find that you'll get a lot more hits on a walking bait. A lot more hits on a walking bait. When the bigger females move up onto the nest, you will be able to catch them as well. And then moving through post-spawn. Post-spawn is a particularly good time of year. The bass start to feed up on bait fish and anything that they can get their mouths around, frankly, because spawning is very stressful for them and they don't eat during the spawn. A little pro tip here, well, not pro tip, but a little tip here, guys. At that time of year, post-spawn, when the males are not fry guarding anymore, and even when they are fry guarding, but particularly when they're finished, a small walking bait, say like a Zara puppy, can be deadly effective, mimicking small fry and things like that. Moving into the summer, for me, it's always been an early and late deal, unless you live on a lake where you have the pelagic bait fish, like blueback herring, shad, shiners, that kind of stuff, where you have the bass pushing the bait fish up to the surface. Then obviously you can fish your top waters over the top of them, and there's a very strong likelihood that the bass is going to eat your top water, but your walking bait, if you can get it in amongst the bait fish. Into the fall. Fall is my favorite time of year to fish walking baits. I don't know why it is. I think maybe even all bass species, largemouth spots and smallies, get super aggressive with the knowledge that winter is coming soon. So they just feed really heavily, and kind of if you get them at the right time, you can clean them up on a topwater walking bait. You really can. It can be. You can have the best fishing days of your life at that time of year, in my opinion. So what kind of weather for a walking bait? The difference between the topwater baits that we've discussed already and the walking baits. Poppers, buzzing frogs, floating frogs, even a buzz bait really shine when there is no chop on the water. Even though a buzzbait, it can be very good when there's a slight chop, but for whatever reason, walking baits, when there's a small chop, when there's a breeze blowing across the surface of the water, they seem to shine. It seems to be for me, it's always been the bait of choice. I'll put on a big walking bait and off we go. And I haven't had anybody explain that to me sufficiently so I can definitively say that's the reason. The only thing I can think in my mind is, and I think we said it in the buzzbait video as well, that the disturbance on the surface of the water maybe breaks up the outline of the bait on the surface, and all the bass get to see is this thing going from side to side like this, side to side, and they just hit it out of anger or out of aggression. So let's say that it is a bait for the period of the year. It works best when the water is warmer. So when you're learning to fish a topwater walking bait, I would say from the spawn to the middle of the fall or the autumn is prime time. Absolutely prime time. You'll see in the close-ups when we go to the map, we discuss it's a shallow water bait, but there are situations for when it's a deep water bait. We touched on it briefly now when we said lakes that have pelagic bait fish in them. Let's talk about the retrieve a little bit, because this is the important part with topwater walking baits. And the thing that you've got to understand, guys, is the smaller the walking bait, the more difficult it is to get it to do what you want it to do. In fact, with small walking baits, really small ones, you would probably have to go to, say, 12-pound mono, because even though mono floats, just the weight of that mono between the rod tip and the bait it will not allow the bait to walk correctly if the mono is too heavy. But for now, because we're learning, we're going to say, let's just take an average size bait like a Lucky Craft Sammy or a Zara Spook, something along those lines. The retrieves, there's two main retrieves that I like to use with walking baits. And the way that you're going to hold your rod for this exercise is, after the cast, is in a downward position, say kind of a 45 degree. And the first type of retrieve is a quicker retrieve, but when quick is very relative in this thing, when you do it, you will see whether it's too fast, because the bait will not walk. It'll just go in a straight line. So this is one of those things where you've got to try it till you get it. But in the first one, the quicker retrieve is, the way I do it is just like a downward cut. Imagine if you were chopping wood, so it would be chop, 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 and winding at the same time, chop, 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 chop. They walk on the slack line, so that when you pull the line tight, it pulls the bait forward. When the line is slack, it causes it to go to one side or to the other side. And they pretty much will do that by themselves once you get the cadence right. So for that first retrieve, it's a very aggressive retrieve. It's a kind of a chop, 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 pause, chop, 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 pause, chop, 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 pause. I like to use that retrieve when the fish are very active, when the fish are hunting, and you will know because you'll see them busting up bait on banks and things like that. And the second retrieve is when fish may be slightly more lethargic, and I also use it in water that is a little bit more stained to allow them time to find the bait. So what I do then is I will do the same action as I've just told you, but a lot slower. So it would be chop, wind, chop, wind, chop, wind, chop, wind, pause. Chop, wind, chop, wind, chop, wind, chop, wind, pause. And the more you concentrate on your chop and how hard you chop it, if you will find, is particularly with the slightly bigger baits, let's say 5 inches and bigger, if you do your chop in a controlled manner, chop, wind, you can actually get that bait to move 12 to 18 inches either side of center, and center being the direction which your rod tip is pointing. So you can actually get that thing to glide like that if your chop is controlled and not just chop, 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 chop like that. It's a pretty cool bait. Once you get your cadence right, it'll be like a light bulb going on. You'll be able to physically see on the bait when it's coming towards you. You'll see once you've got your cadence right. And like we mentioned a little bit earlier, different types of walking baits require little tweaks in your cadence to get them to walk perfectly. For those of us starting out learning how to fish walking baits, my suggestion to you, excuse me. My suggestion to you would be to start with something like a Lucky Craft Sammy. The way that the Sammy is made, it sits in a very head up profile like that on the water. So if that was the surface of the water, the tail of the bait is always down because it's tail weighted, which also helps for casting. And the head always sits slightly up like that. And what that does is on your first chop like that, the tail of the bait comes up out of the water and it starts moving by itself virtually, Whereas with a spook or a bait like that, it takes a little bit more finagling to work out how to get that bait to walk properly. Trying to think if there's any other tips, tricks. If you really want to slow your spook down or your walking bait down, you could put a feathered treble on it. Don't do it on smaller baits. The only small bait that I know of that walks absolutely perfectly with a feathered treble is a Megabass Karashi. But for us, those of us that are learning, that is not the bait that you want to learn with. Start off with a bigger bait so that you can work out exactly how to get that bait to walk. The strike, like with most other topwater baits that we talk about, the strike is, there's one of two strikes. They come up and just, it looks like you've dumped a pile of bricks on top of your baits, and they try and, some of them even jump out the water with the bait in their mouth. And the second one, you may just see a dark shadow come up underneath it like that, and it's gone. So it's the same as for a frog, it's the same as for a popper. Not quite as violent a take as you would get from, say, a buzz bait. But they get super aggressive with walking baits. Many times I've had it where the bass actually comes up from underneath, grabs the bait, and just carries on going into the air. So it can be a really exciting way to fish. For parents teaching your kids, this is one of those baits where you've got to just be a little bit aware what's behind them. Most of the baits that we use when we're learning to fish topwater walking baits have big treble hooks on them. So parents, just be aware of that. And they stick a lot. So that's going to do it. That's going to do it for the walking baits. It's one of those baits that you've got to persevere and keep trying. It's not an easy bait to fish, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. Just a couple of ideas. The early and late thing, early in the morning, late in the afternoon, has always worked well for me with big walking baits. I think it's obviously just because of the low light conditions and that kind of stuff. But I have always, I don't know what the deal is with them. I've always done really well with them, throwing them around areas where you wouldn't have thought would be a good area to throw a 5 or 6 inch bait on the surface, like bluff banks. They seem to work really well there. Riprap banks really well. Around dam walls, really well. If you've got standing timber in deeper water, say 12, 15 foot of water, and you fish it around that standing timber, really well. I don't know why it is, but it just works. So try it. If that's something that you have in your lake or your body of water where you're going to fish, just give it a try. You won't know if you don't try. So just a little bit of out of the box thinking there, maybe. I don't know. I can't explain it to you. If I could explain it to you, I would, but I can't. I don't know why it works, but it works. So try it. I think that's going to do it for this week, guys. Not a tremendously long episode this week, but more dialed in on a specific bait. If I've missed anything and there's questions that you guys have, chuck them in the comments below. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us.